Well, what's up, guys? Welcome back to the Light and Lamp podcast. I am here with Steve,
Hello.
as always, and we are going to be doing our round one wrap up slash mini preview of round two slash whatever is going on in hockey, because it's whatever is going on at like 110 mile an hour pace right now. Round two actually started like the day round one ended, which was insanity. But
I mean, technically, like there could have been round one games going on at the same time that round two had already started.
yeah, if Dallas Calgary went to 7 games, then, or if Montreal Philly went to 7 games, they would have played on Monday and round two started on Saturday.
Yeah.
Just like, okay.
But I guess they have to keep up the pace, right, in order to keep things trucking along.
Yeah, they're trying to shave as much time as they can off of the playoffs. Before we do a bit of the controversy surrounding Alan Walsh and Marc-Andre Fleury with Pete DeBoer.
Oh, boy. I mean, I don't know if there's much of a controversy outside of his agent, right? Like, nobody seemed to be saying much, and his agent took it upon himself to really go out there and not necessarily make it, like, I guess make a statement's the lightest way to put it. I mean, that image was...
Yeah, he wasn't just like, I believe my client should get more playing time. He came like kicking in the door, like blowing the hinges off the door. He was like, coming out with this image of, it's since been deleted at the request of Marc-Andre Fleury, but it was Marc-Andre Fleury in his Golden Knights uniform being stabbed in the back with a sword that said DeBoer on it. And it's like...
And, okay, I understand Alan Walsh, obviously, as an agent, has his client's best interest at heart, right? He wants Marc-Andre Fleury to play. Fleury probably wants to play. But the reality is, Fleury really wasn't that great this season, and Robin Lehner was like 4-5-0 with like a sub 2 goals against average and like a .920 save percentage before the pause when he came over to the Golden Knights. According to Pete DeBoer, just outplayed him all through camp and obviously in the games, because Fleury's got 1 game played and I think he might have won it in a back-to-back, but that's the only time he saw. It was very clear that like Robin Lehner was the guy coming forward. So like going into the playoffs, because he got the entire exhibition match, and then he played the whole round robin, all of their first round series.
Well, if you ask me, I think his outrage is a little bit poorly timed, I would say, because I was like anybody when the Golden Knights traded for Leonard in the first place. I was like, I don't really see the issue here. I don't really understand why they're making this move. Maybe they took notes from teams like St. Louis or the Islanders or the Bruins, who had a platoon style system. Was like, look, they're having success doing this. Maybe we need a bit of a stronger backup than Malcolm Subban was at the time.
I mean, I can understand that, but like then they could have went out and got a guy from a team that's not competing, right? Like a guy that could be a backup. But they went and got, obviously the Blackhawks aren't competing, but they traded away Malcolm Subban, who's a decent backup, not like he never reached the potential that like a lot of people had for him coming out of the draft, but they trade Malcolm Subban to the Blackhawks, which makes sense. He's like 26. The Blackhawks need a backup. It's not a bad option, but instead of going for a guy in Corey Crawford, who would make more sense as a platoon style goaltender, he's 35.
He's like 34, 35, yeah.
And he's got, some miles on him, and he could come in and win you a game every couple of on back-to-backs, or if Fleury has an off night, you could throw him in. He might be all right behind a pretty defensively sound team, but they went and got Robin Lehner, so I don't really understand, like, why. Like, I understand what you're saying with the platoon, right, because the Bruins, obviously, and the Dallas Stars have had great success up to this point, because right now both their backups are starting, and they're still winning hockey games.
Yeah.
But they really weren't. Like, Leonard is not a platoon guy to me, and he's
a starter, and he's proved that.
Yeah, twice now, 3 times.
It was just a weird trade at the time, because sure, Fleury was struggling, but I don't think that going out and getting a guy who's clearly at this point proven not only is he a starter, but he's an above average starter, borderline elite with his numbers over the last 2 years. I mean, maybe if you want to pump the brakes on calling him elite, maybe give him another year or two of those kind of numbers, then you can call him elite. But he's put up elite style numbers over the last 2 years.
Right.
It's not like there weren't platoon options. I mean, go get Jonathan Bernier from Detroit. He's a perfect platoon type goaltender.
Jack Campbell hit the market a couple months earlier.
Like,
they missed out on
Robin Lehner.
I don't know. So, like hell, even Georgiev was on the market at one point supposedly. I mean, there were options out there. I mean, I'm sure Carolina would have loved to have given up James Reimer for like an actual backup. right? I mean, there's a platoon goalie right there you could have got.
So I think if he would have raised the alarm when that trade was made, I could have understood it. But I mean, since coming in, Leonard's been doing what Robin Leonard did literally all of last season, which is play great hockey. And
he's behind a team that's significantly better defensively than the Chicago Blackhawks. So it's obvious, like, he's not struggling the way Fleury did at all. And why would you go back? I understand Fleury's got the pedigree, right? The 2-time Stanley Cup champ, or the
technically four.
Technically
two as a
4
backup.
Yeah. I honestly, I'll put an asterisk on the 1. He played up until the Eastern Conference Final and had one bad game and got pulled and never got put back in, which I thought was really unfair to him at the time. But, I mean, he got them there. So I'll say he's won 2.5 Stanley Cups as a starter.
Right.
You know, and I think he's got the pedigree. I don't know if he's ever won a Vezina Trophy or anything, but he's been nominated. I know he has. He's at least finished in the top 5 in Vezina Trophy voting. So it's just, why just like pierce his ego at all? Like, isn't this a guy you want going forward to be like your goaltender? Granted, he's like 38 now, Fleury, but I mean,
Fleury has 3 Stanley Cups?
Oh, I guess he might not have been there for the 1. The expansion
2008, 2009, 2015, 16, and 16,
Oh,
17.
right. They only won the 3. They played in 4 Stanley Cup finals. So he's so he's still 2.5 times Stanley Cup champ as a starter.
Yeah, and it's just really weird, you know, when you make that trade, again, if you're trading for a platoon-style goaltender, that's fine. You know, you take notes from teams that have had success in the past. Like, you know, we saw the Bruins do it this year, the Islanders for the last 2 years. Even a team like, the Rangers really had been rotating 3 goalies this season and had some success. Like, you take notes from teams like, all right, we want to do that. You know, God forbid if Fleury goes down in the playoffs. Maybe they feel like we're a Stanley Cup contending team, so we want that insurance policy. God forbid he gets hurt. We need that competent backup. But then you go and trade for a guy who arguably should be starting 60-plus games.
It's like having a really nice, like, Lincoln Continental, right? Like, it's your daily driver. It's a nice car. It gets the job done. Sure, it's a little older now, and it might not be as nice as it was when it was brand new, but it's proven, right? It gets you from point A to point B, and it's done it all before. It's driven you across country 3 times, right? And then you go out and trade for a brand new and you go out and buy a brand new Corvette as your backup.
It's like, why though?
It's like, why would you need this Corvette needs to be driven, you know? So then it's like, okay, so what do? You put the Lincoln Continental in the garage because it's a little older, it's got a little more miles on it, and now you're driving this Corvette, and your Lincoln Continental's looking at you like, hey man, like, I've been doing this for you for years. Like, why would you do this to me? It just, like, it didn't make any sense at the time. It doesn't make any sense now, and it's created an unwanted distraction for the Vegas Golden. I mean, it didn't hinder them at all in Game 1, right? They went out there and actually smashed the Canucks, but still, like, it's a distraction that I don't think they wanted, and there's been a lot of, I feel like, unwanted distractions, specifically coming from the net of a lot of these teams that are supposedly contenders.
I think Alan Walsh really misstepped here. I think he probably I'm going to go out on a limb and assume he didn't contact Marc-Andre Fleury before he posted this. Otherwise, I'm assuming it would not have been posted.
Because Fleury's a happy-go-lucky guy, right? He's a team-first guy. Right now, I'm pretty sure he's probably not happy he's not playing, but he's probably happy the team's having success.
And he's always been that way, even when he was splitting time with Tomas Vokoun when they pulled him in, when Matt Murray started to, his rise. Like, he's always been that kind of guy. He's always been like, all right, like,
he's a great teammate.
He kind of just owns it. He's like, I haven't been good enough, and that it is what it is. But I think that's a real bad mistake for Alan Walsh, because like now that puts all that spotlight on your client who you're trying to defend. Now he has to field questions about your stupidity. When
in reality, like you said, he probably had little to no input to this at all, if any.
Sure, maybe Fleury went to his agent and was like, listen, Alan, like maybe we should explore a trade for next season. If Vegas signs Robin Leonard long term, I would like to be traded. And like that's all well and good. That's perfectly fine. But right. Then you don't, in the middle of the Stanley Cup playoffs, go and post something as inflammatory as that, directly accusing Pete DeBoer of stabbing your goaltender in the back.
And I mean, it's just, I don't know. It's such an... It's in poor taste. Idea. It's in such poor taste, Like, I just don't understand why he felt the need to do it. Because like you said, like his job is a liaison. He could have just went to Pete DeBoer and said, "Hey, like, Mark's not really like Flowers not really all that happy with his playing time. Are there any options we can explore? Sit down and talk to the team." But he, like you said, put all the spotlight right out in the media, and who knows? These discussions might have gone on in the background, right? But that's really where they should have stayed. It should have stayed between Fleury, his agent, and the coaching staff and the team. There's no reason to air this out because, like you said before, it's just a distraction, and it puts a lot of unwanted emphasis on him, and he's not even playing right now. So as a team, they're probably your team is probably like, what is going on? What is this?
You know who the most unfair this really is to is Robin Leonard, because he had nothing to do with this, and then at the first sign of trouble, if he has a bad game or anything, that's the first thing everyone's going to bring up is, oh, well, is Flower going to get the net now? Oh, let's see what Pete DeBoer does. And it's like that is like Robin had nothing to do with Robin and Flower probably woke up that morning and were like, oh God, like what is happening?
And I'm sure I'm sure it's in the back of Pete DeBoer's head now, right? Like he's probably got a slightly itchier trigger finger than he might have had before. Before that image comes out, he might have been a little more lenient. Leonard gets a bad game, he gets pulled. You go right back to him. But now he might feel like some sort of obligation to be like, all right, well, Flower's really not happy, and I might have to pull the trigger on a goaltending change here, even though it might not be the best for the team. Because like we said, Flower struggled, and Leonard's been really good for both the Blackhawks and the Knights this year.
Yeah, so we'll definitely be keeping an eye out on that. That's something we're definitely going to talk about when this whole thing wraps up in the offseason, because there are several teams that could use a goaltender like Marc-Andre Fleury, who maybe at this point he's not what he used to be, but he's still an average to above average starter, and a lot of teams could use a guy like him. So it'll be interesting to see what happens with Robin Leonard if he signs in Vegas, if he, again, goes elsewhere. We'll definitely be keeping that in mind. Going back to the first round series, I know we talked about a lot of them. There's not much to talk about with some of them. Obviously, with like Philly, Montreal, that kind of just wrapped up the way we thought it would.
Montreal gave them everything they had, and Philly, I think Philly's a better team for it, to be honest with you. They faced a really tough team that a lot of people didn't expect, and I think it's prepared them to play like a lot of tough matchups. It taught them not to look past anybody, I think.
Yeah, and it showed to me that, Carey Price still has some gas left in the tank.
Some gas left in the tank? I mean, come on. He's the only reason they got through the play-in round. And honestly, the only reason that series even went 6 games.
Yeah, for sure. So I think it could be interesting. Maybe, that was Carey Price's way of proving to the league, like, hey, like, take a chance. Come get me out of Montreal. Like, I'm sure at this point he'd be more than happy to waive his no-trade clause and get out of Montreal if it meant a deep cup run, because this guy has never seen past the second round. I mean, the Montreal Canadiens went to the
conference final. He played in game 1 of the conference final, but he went down with that injury.
So really, he's played one game past round 2 his whole career. This could be his way of signaling, like, listen, like, I've still got some gas left to give you guys.
A team like Colorado could use a guy like that. You stick Carey Price on Colorado, and I think they win a Stanley Cup every year for 2-3 years. However much gas he's got left in the tank, they'll go as far as Carey Price can take them. And
sorry.
I was gonna say, I think the other thing to point out with Montreal was that their young guys managed to take a lot of big steps for them.
Nick Suzuki played really well.
Even Kakakiniemi played really well. I mean, 4 goals through 6 games. At some point during the season, the playoffs, like I guess it was by game 2 or 3, he had 4 goals in 6 games. I mean, he played well. He got thrown out of that one game, but I mean, Suzuki, Kakaniemi, they all stepped up big when they needed to. I mean, Drouin was kind of invisible, and Max Domi was absolutely invisible, like 100% invisible. But I just think, I don't know. I think there's a lot to be excited for if you're a Habs fan, right? Because your goaltender is still world class, and you've got some young players willing to take some big steps.
They're in a bit of a weird spot because a lot of the pieces on that roster, like Carey Price, Shea Weber, Jeff Petrie,
they're all north of 30.
Yeah, and then you've also got this weird mishmash in the middle with guys like Brendan Gallagher, Max Domi, who are like 24, 26, and then you got the really young guys like Nick Suzuki, and I think Kotkaniemi's only like 22, 23. It's like they have this weird mishmash. Like they kind of have to pick a lane at this point. I think they're in their best interest would be to really build around the really young core, build around guys like Suzuki, Mete, Cole Caulfield at some point when he starts playing for them.
They have a defenseman. They have a Russian defenseman that people have been talking about too. He's supposed to come over from the KHL soon.
So like they have to just pick a lane, I think, which is kind of what we've been saying about them for the last 2 or 3 years is just pick a lane, because otherwise you end up in
the Minnesota Wild's
position. Overall, I thought it was a decent series for them. It was good for Carey Price to show that he's got some stuff left in the tank. Maybe he can get a look from some teams, and I hope he does, because personally I think he deserves it at this point.
The only detriment I think this can have, I mean, there's really nothing wrong. There's really no bad downside to getting playoff experience early, right? Like, their younger guys might benefit from having this experience, right? So they might know what it's like to play in some tighter checking games. But I think it could be deceiving to specifically management. Like, we know Marc Bergevin has always been kind of quick to pull the trigger. I mean, he's been very aggressive. He tried to get Sebastian Aho last offseason.
Still very interesting, that story.
So what I hope happens is they don't get the wool doesn't get pulled over their eyes. They don't get deceived by the one playoff round they've had in 6 years or whatever it is, you know?
Yeah, and the thing with Montreal is they're in a better spot than Minnesota because they don't have a lot of these
nasty contracts.
Like, Weber's contract's not great,
but it's like the one of maybe all of them.
But I think Carey Price has proven that he's still worth his contract, especially to a bubble team who might just be looking for some playoff experience. Whereas Minnesota has the Parise and Suter contracts that go into their 40s, both with no move clauses. So if they don't want to leave, guess what? They're not going anywhere. I think Dubnyk, I think, might have an NTC in there as well. Who knows if his career's over at this point.
I mean,
they have just a lot of really awful contracts that are slated with no trade clauses.
Well, that's kind of what I'm saying, right? I hope that Montreal, like Marc Bergevin, doesn't get buy into the idea that maybe they're 1 or 2 pieces away, right? Like, oh, maybe we're a goal-scoring winger away, right? So then he goes out and signs Mike Hoffman to a huge contract and gives him a full no-move clause, right? Just to get him out of free agency. And it's like, okay, that's all well and good. Mike Hoffman's only like 27 or 28, but it still doesn't address the issue of, well, what are you trying to do? Like, you're just adding a bunch of mishmash to more mishmash, and the only reason you even got to the first round is because of the playoff format.
Right.
They weren't even in the conversation. They weren't even close.
No. And
so I hope that's more of the barometer where they sit, right? Where they look at the regular season and say, okay, over 69 or 70 games, we finished 12th. We only got in on a technicality, and then we got in on an even bigger technicality because we won. I really think they should be like, okay, we took some good steps, but we need to commit more to the young guys and continue moving in that direction, all while still maybe staying somewhat competitive. There is a way to like rebuild on the fly, right? I mean,
it's more or less what the Blackhawks are doing.
Yeah, stay in, finish 12, 13 in your conference, but keep playing some meaningful games into March and April, and those players get the experience, and then you're ready to take the big step. You take the big step.
Yeah, and I mean, there's still a lot of work to be done in Montreal. I think for the Flyers, I think this series really just kind of showed you, like you said, they can't really look past them. But just for posterity, we're recording this on Monday. I almost said April. God, no, it is not April.
I hope not.
It is Monday, August 24th. We're recording this at 7 o'clock. So right now, the Islanders-Flyers game 1 is going on. So some of this information, like we said, might be dated by the time this gets out to you guys. But I think it showed the Flyers that, I think Game 3 was a real big wake-up Game 2 when they got slammed 5-0 was kind of a wake-up call. Like, you're not just going to walk into the second round of the playoffs. And the Flyers, for all intents and purposes, are a middle-aged team. They've got older pieces like Giroux and Voracek mixed with younger pieces like most of their defensemen and Carter Hart. And I think that kind of wake-up call was like, all right, like guys like Sanheim, Provorov, Hart, Konechny are going to be like, all right, listen, like we can't take anybody lightly in the playoffs because we literally just almost lost to the Montreal Canadiens in the first round. So, Tampa Columbus again wrapped up in 5. It wasn't a 5-game series really. It honestly felt like a 7-game series in those 5 games, just because every game was like 1 or 2 goals.
And they played the one quintuple overtime game, and then there was another overtime game in there.
It was Game 5 was the overtime game where Braden Point sends them to the
2 overtime winners in the offseason this year.
I think this series kind of proved just to me that Tampa's they're more comfortable playing in close games this year. There was not really a lot of panic. There was, last year you would see in close games they would try to get too fancy. They would try to make too many moves at things like the blue line. They would turn the puck over a lot. I think this kind of just proved to us that Tampa Bay is willing to play that Stanley Cup playoff type game this year, and they're not going to get panicky in overtimes. They're not going to get panicky when they go up. They're not going to get panicky when they go down. I don't really know if it tells us a lot about Columbus other than that they just have a really, really strong system that I think they should just keep buying into.
They got great goaltending.
Yeah, and I think really the only detriment in that team is like just a lack of a game breaker. And if they can pick up a game breaker in the offseason, like a bona fide goal scorer, I just want to, when I say game breaker, I really do mean somebody generally I'm talking about goal scorers. Obviously playmakers can be considered game breakers, defensemen can be considered game breakers, but to me a true game breaker is somebody all right, it's 3-2 with 2 minutes left, we need a goal. Who are we passing the puck to? He can take it from his end to the other end, and just rip it and put it in the net. And I think Columbus is really missing that type of guy because they were one goal away in a lot of these games. If you have somebody maybe Vladimir Tarasenko, obviously not going to get him, but somebody like Vladimir Tarasenko or unfortunately for them, Artemi Panarin, or somebody that you can really just be listen, we need a goal, chips are down, we're tied, we're going to get it.
Yeah, which, you saw last year when they swept them, just the availability of having that game breaker in Artemi Panarin changed that whole series because even when Tampa started to get comfortable in games, Panarin would blow it wide open on them, and then they didn't really know how to react. And this year, they had their opportunities. They scored on some of them, but they didn't get what they probably should have.
Yeah, I think this also shows to us that Tampa Bay is okay without Steven Stamkos. Obviously,
he's still not playing.
Yeah, losing your first line center, especially a guy like Steven Stamkos, it's always going to hurt, no matter what. He's a power play trigger man. Their power play has not looked very good without him, I will say that. And it's always going to hurt to lose somebody like that. But I think this proves that they're still a Stanley Cup contender without him.
And game one was last night. He still didn't play. There still really isn't any word on what's ailing. There's not going to be, right? He's just unfit to play. But
he was injured in the training camp, they said.
Yeah, so it's all speculation. I wonder if it's a leg injury again because he's had issues with his legs in the past. Whatever it is, it seems to be nagging him enough to keep him out of playoff games. Usually you have to be dead to keep guys off the ice, and especially this time of year. How many times have we seen guys playing with broken ankles? Patrice Bergeron played in a Stanley Cup final with 2 broken ribs and a punctured lung. So
yeah,
Jake DeBrusk played most of last playoff with a concussion, which again, they didn't say he did, but it was very clear that he had a concussion. He was not right, and.
Well, we got the Calgary Flames, everybody was dead tweet today. Sam Bennett, pulled a muscle in his arm. Tkachuk got a concussion,
Well, yeah, Tkachuk missed the last game.
So we got the everybody was actually dead the whole time tweet. But I feel comfortable with Tampa Bay coming out of this. I feel good about Columbus, too. I think they just need that, that one extra piece up front.
Yeah, if I'm Columbus, I'm not selling the farm, though. I'm not going to sell the farm for, a golden chicken, right? Because there's no point. You've proven you can get here without that golden chicken. Maybe you just need. Everybody could use the golden chicken, but
you can honestly probably just get away with
I know we keep saying his name, but
Mike
Hoffman's
Hoffman,
available.
yeah,
he's a goal scorer. He's a trigger man. The guy does nothing but score goals.
Especially on the power play.
Especially on the power play. Which was also a big detriment because they got a lot of power play opportunities that they couldn't convert
on. Yeah. But overall, I think both teams come out of this feeling good about where they are. Same can't be said for the Islanders-Washington series. Todd Reirden gets the axe. It's funny because after Barry Trotz just seems to be coming for people's jobs this postseason because after the Florida series, Dale Talon got axe in the face. After the Washington series, Todd Reirden got the boot in the face. I think this series, to me, said 2 things. It said, one, the Islanders, when they're completely healthy, are a very dangerous, smothering team. But I think, too, it said a lot about the impact of coaching on this Washington team. And where does this leave Washington, in your opinion? Is the window closing? Or do you think it's they still have the personnel, maybe they just need the coaching? Where does this leave you with the Washington Capitals at this point? Because this is another first round exit.
I think it's kind of what we talked about before, right? With Todd Reardon, was he kept trying to be Barry Trotz and play the Barry Trotz system in Washington. When sure it worked for Trotz, right? They won a Stanley Cup, but
he's not Barry Trotz.
No, and it just didn't. He wasn't willing to make the adjustments. It seemed like to get more out of his players. I mean, they by and large, Washington looked very disinterested in that series. They almost looked like they did not care at all.
Well, if it tells you anything, literally only 3 players scored a goal the entire series for Washington.
One of them's name is Alex Ovechkin.
TJ Oshie got 2 in Game 1. Ovechkin got 2 in Game 2. Kuznetsov got 1 in Game 3. Ovechkin got 1 in Game 3. Like, those are the only 3 guys that scored any goals. No goals from Backstrom, Carlson, Eller,
Tom
Wilson, even a guy that was the depth forward for them, like Carl Hack. Like, they got nothing out of any of these guys.
Their power play looked miserable.
And, you know, I still like the look of the Capitals roster. It's funny because we've talked about before how the 2018 roster that won that cup really wasn't the strongest iteration of that roster at all. I just think that they had the best coach at the right time. And I think that's really what it comes down to. I think the only issue on Washington that they might need to address, obviously, this offseason is the goaltending. You know, looks like they're gonna give it to Samsonov and let him run the reins. But if he struggles, they might be in the market come like even as early as I would say like December. If they're like struggling and they're really not picking up points in the standings, like I think as early as like December they'll pull the trigger on a goalie trade because you're not letting this roster miss the playoffs. I don't know. I feel like a lot of Washington's problems kind of just stem from the coaching.
Yeah. I think the coaching really was the big downfall. Like, they got significant, like we said one Green. Like
old man strength Andy Green.
But like anyway. Todd Reardon really just got outcoached by Barry Trotz. Like, his top 6 couldn't do much against the smothering defense of the Islanders, and he made almost no adjustments to try and, you know, open the game back up for them.
Which is what I was confused about. Was I said after Game 2, I was fully expecting the next game for them to come out and just be like, all right, listen, like, we're just gonna free the big dogs. Like, we're just gonna let Ovechkin, Kuznetsov, Backstrom, or he came back in Game 4 or Game 5. We're just gonna let, you know, Ovechkin, Carlson, Kuznetsov, Oshie, like, we're just gonna let the big dogs go and see what they can do. And like, Holtby was playing pretty good up to that point. It's like, all right, listen, like, Holtby's got a little bit of his swagger back. We're gonna open the game up. We're gonna let him feel the puck and get a lot of shots. And we're just gonna see what we can do. And there just was no adjustment after that. There was just no opening of the game for the Washington Caps, which I think is what they needed to do to win the series. You can't. Well, you're not going to out defense Barry Trotz.
They needed to score. Because the Islanders can't. The Islanders, for all intents, are not an offensive team. Nobody's going to mistake them for being the Edmonton Oilers, right?
God, no.
So, like, if Reardon went into that thinking, oh, we can play defense with them, we can play a defensive checking game with them, and it's like, okay, well, you're stupid, 1, and 2, how did you ever think you were going to win the series?
Stupid 1. It's
2,
true though.
Like, how did you think you were going to win the series like that? Like, on it, like, tell me. Like, I would love to know how Todd Reardon thought that was going to go. It's like essentially getting in the octagon with a boxer and being like, yo, I'm going to box him for 8 rounds. It's like, no, why would you do that? Why wouldn't you play to your strengths? Why are you going to play to their strengths? And for 3-4 games, Washington tried to play a defensive game, and it's like, oh my god, like, what is, like, why, like, what is wrong with you?
And then they won Game 4, and Game 5 they came out and they were again just very conservative. There was like 5 shots, it was like 7 shot attempts from them in the first 10 minutes. Just very conservative. They looked afraid, and it's like, you don't have to be afraid of the Islanders offense. So for all intents and purposes, go ahead, take that shot from the point. If it ricochets off the boards and comes out the other end, it's probably not anybody, unless it's Matt Barzal or Beauvillier, it's not really somebody you're going to have to worry about on a breakaway. Like, and don't get me wrong, this is not me saying anything bad about the Islanders. You guys know I love my team, but it's just the truth. If it's not Ovechkin on that breakaway. It's not Patrick Kane on that breakaway.
Which is so strange to me that because in 2018 when they played the Penguins, right? For years, they had gone into the series looking scared, like they did this year. And they went out and they played them straight, and they won the series, right? They went on that famous overtime goal by Kuznetsov. with their backs to the wall, Washington looked like they didn't care. They looked, like you said, they looked scared. They looked disinterested. They almost, like, as soon as the Islanders got on the board, Washington almost threw the towel in. And it was just, I don't know. I really think that the coaching change is smart. I mean, like, Todd Reirden very clearly was not getting anything out of that roster that it should have. I mean, they should be in the second round, realistically.
We said at the beginning, at the top of the playoffs, that the Washington Capitals are really the only team that we both considered bona fide Stanley Cup contenders. Whereas
in the Metro, yeah.
We in the Metro Division, yeah, because we put the Islanders and the Flyers on a bubble. They were the only team we were like, these guys should arguably be third round minimum.
Yeah.
And Ovechkin's golfing again.
I mean, there were only, in my mind, at the start of the playoffs, there were only three teams, like we said, that were like bona fide contenders: Washington, Boston, and Tampa Bay. Boston and Tampa Bay are playing each other in the second round, like they should, and Washington, like you said, is golfing. So it's just, I mean, it's going to prove that, like, how wild and unpredictable these playoffs specifically have been because of the
the nature of the format and the nature of every team kind of coming in on the same wavelength.
I think so. I want to talk about how just the playoffs at large, that any team that was leading the series won the series. There was no comebacks, really. I mean, Dallas came back from 2-1 or 2-0. I don't know.
It was a weird playoffs because there was no sweeps, but no 7-game series either. It was all 4-1, 4-2.
Yeah, and like I said, anybody that had been winning the series up to that point won. Like, did Montreal pull even for a game? Yeah, but then they got outclassed for 3 straight and lost.
Yeah,
Dallas managed to play walk a knife's edge and play a dangerous game with Calgary, and then they come out and absolutely shell the Colorado Avalanche and beat them. What was it, 5-2 or whatever they beat them the other night?
Yeah, I do want to talk about them. I think they're going to be an interesting topic. We'll wrap up the East real quick because Boston, Carolina. I mean, really,
it really wasn't that interesting. It kind of went as expected.
The issue is, again, Carolina needs a goalie.
And
that's kind of what it came down to. And I hate to be that way, but not necessarily that the games were on Peter Mrazek or James Reimer, but in the playoffs, just doing your job as a goalie isn't good enough.
I mean, the game,
you have to find a way to win games.
And I think the Bruins' depth ended up being like the undoing of Carolina as well, because I mean, Svechnikov went down with that freak accident, right? Broke his ankle, and the team just never recovered after that. They kind of floundered for the next, however many games. What was it, 2 games that they lost?
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, that was a big shot in the foot. And then it gets, what is essentially subpar goaltending this time of year. There was a lot of going against them, and I only say it finished like we expected because, I mean, everybody was probably betting on the Bruins to win. Yeah.
And look, did Halak have a great series? No. I think there was a lot of goals in that series that Halak would want to have back. He got beat clean on the glove hand a couple of times that probably shouldn't have. But the difference is he found a way to win games, even when he wasn't playing great. Whereas Mrazek and Reimer combined, not that they found a way to lose, but they just didn't find that way to win.
The other thing is, Halak was coming in ice cold. I mean, Reimer and Mrazek don't have an excuse to say, well, we weren't ready. They've been playing this whole time.
Well, Reimer played Game 4 against the Rangers.
Halak was literally sitting on the bench, not expecting to play, and then Tuukka Rask, as we talked about last week, said,
"Deuces, I'm out."
And now Halak's got to go in and play actual playoff games. And yeah, so Halak might not have looked the greatest, but like you said, he found ways to win, and I only expect him to get better. I mean, like, the more comfortable he gets, the more action he sees, the more of like game shape he'll look. So the Bruins are looking scary, man.
Yeah, I mean, I think the Bruins more or less come out of this series as, well, the Boston Bruins. I mean,
yeah.
The
big thing is they didn't get hurt.
They didn't get hurt, and they started to get a little bit of production out of Pastrnak, which they weren't getting even before he sat out.
Before he got hurt, yeah.
So they started to get a little bit of value out of him. Maybe, not even necessarily just on a scoreboard, but just in the way that he was playing. He was playing like the way we know he could. They didn't get hurt. They come out of it feeling better about Halak, and Halak played an absolutely fantastic Game 1 against Tampa Bay Lightning, which we'll get to. But I think the Hurricanes come out of this saying, "Oh well, we got Bruins again." It's like, no, you got subpar goaltender again.
You got goaled essentially. You
And
got
it's-
reverse goalied. Like you can
and
get
it's-
goalied and have a good team running. You run into a hot goalie. You know, ergo like Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh got goalied, but
You got goalied by your own guy in the
Yeah.
worst way, and it's like, what was the only weakness of the Hurricanes this year? Well, they didn't have great goaltending. It's like, wow, it's the same as every year with them.
it's almost as if like their general manager is doing nothing to address the issue. Like signing Peter Mrazek to a contract.
Was
Like he
not
did.
the solution.
No, especially when a guy like Sergei Bobrovsky and Robin Lehner hit the open market,
Yeah,
and now you have Braden Holtby hitting the open market.
Yeah, and we'll see. We'll see if they decide to actually address their goaltending issues. We'll flip over to the West. Vegas, Chicago. Chicago shouldn't have even been there, and that's not to take anything away from them. What they did to the Oilers was hysterical to me, because it just
It proved everything.
it proved everyone right about the Oilers. But really, there was no series in this. I mean, it was really the Golden Knights who, for all intents and purposes, I know we both have a lot of opinions on the Golden Knights. I just want to put this out there, okay? While I may not like the team personally, there's a lot of teams that I don't like personally, but I'm willing to recognize that they are a solid team. In my opinion, they're a deep team. They're a complete roster. There's no real holes on the team. But we need to stop acting as if they already have the cup in hand. Every time anybody hears about the Golden Knights, it's, well, this team is going to go deep in the playoffs this year. This team is going to do this. They're going to be competing for a cup. And it's like, you can say that they should, but to say they are is a bit presumptuous. And again, this isn't me like bagging on them. I recognize that they are indeed a talented team, and could they win the Stanley Cup this year? Absolutely, they're a complete team. But like, let's not pretend they're like the '85 Oilers or anything.
I think they get the benefit of playing in probably the worst division in the league.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, everybody gets to look at them like, wow, look how good they are. Look how many wins they get. And it's like, yeah, they're beating up on, the California teams 7 times a year or whatever it is. And then they get to play the Oilers, who aren't very good. They get to play the Canucks, who are pretty good. I mean, they're good. I like the Canucks.
They get to play the perennial underachieving Coyotes every year.
Yeah, so it's like, oh wow, you mean if they were doing this in the Metro or the Central, I'd be like, okay, this is like the real deal, right? But I'm not willing to buy any of this hype until I see it, because like for 70 games they were playing against in a division that was honestly terrible.
And they weren't leading the division for most of it.
No, they only got first place in the conference. They only won the division on the last day, I think, by like 2 points over the Canucks, and then got into the round robin and played well enough in the round robin to win and get first overall.
Yeah, and again, this isn't us saying that it's a bad team. I think we both recognize that, yeah, they can definitely win the Stanley Cup. It's like I said, there's really not a lot of holes on this roster.
They're just not very exciting.
But it's just like, let's not pretend that they're a shoo-in, and let's also recognize, and we're talking to like hockey media in general, let's pump the brakes on them a little bit. Let's treat them as what they are, a Stanley Cup contender, not a Stanley Cup champion.
I think the other thing is, like, I don't know if I'd like the way they're talked about it. Like, you'd think they're as good as the Tampa Bay Lightning or the Boston Bruins, and it's like, yeah, but the Boston Bruins won 40 something. They had almost 50 wins before the pause. Like, they won the President's Trophy. Like, they get that respect of being like, okay, we can like say when they when they play for a Stanley Cup, or saying that they will play for a Stanley Cup. Tampa Bay, is proving that like they're still one of the best teams in the league. So it's the same kind of thing. I mean, the teams in the West that get that kind of rap are the Central Division teams mostly. Like, we let those guys all get that kind of.
Like the Avs, the Stars, the Blues.
Right, but the other thing is, like, but I wouldn't put the Knights in that conversation at all with those teams. I wouldn't say they're of the same class.
Honestly, I was thinking about this last night. I would say we have left in the playoffs at this point. The Stars, the Avalanche, the Lightning, and the Bruins are like the top 4 contenders. And then I'd honestly probably put Philly and Vegas in tier like A. If it's like S plus of those 4, then it's like tier A, and then you probably have like, I would say the Islanders are kind of like in their own like weird like
A-
coin
tier.
flip, like what kind of team are you going to get tier, and then the Vancouver Canucks for all intents and purposes are a dark horse.
Yeah.
And that's not saying anything bad about them. We both really like the Vancouver Canucks, but they're probably the least likely to win the cup out of the remaining teams. Doesn't mean they can't, but probably the least likely.
And after the showing they had against the Knights the other night, it's going to be hard for them.
Colorado, Arizona, I mean, again, the series was kind of over before it started because Arizona just declined to show up.
I mean,
the only one on the team who showed up was Darcy Kemper. I think the most interesting thing that came out of that series was an interview with Taylor Hall where they asked him what he was looking forward to in the offseason, and he said, winning is what I'm after. And that's not what he got in Arizona.
And I doubt that's what he's going to get in Arizona, especially, with John Chaika walking out on them.
That comment to me, it tells a lot. Because usually when an athlete wants to stay but they can't say anything like that, they'll be like, oh, we're just going to take it day by day. Like, we're going to go into the offseason, we'll see what happens. But he came out, he's like, I want to win. He's like, well, I'm after winning in this league. And it's like, well, you just got slammed in the first round by the Colorado Avalanche.
Which, again...
And you weren't really even in that series at all. And this is coming from somebody who had a lot of excitement for the Arizona Coyotes this year, and they just proved me wrong again.
The Coyotes looked awful. Like,
the only one that even showed up was Darcy Kemper.
The only time those games were ever even was at puck drop. At opening puck drop, that was the only time that game was ever even. And then after that, it was all Colorado all the time for 60 straight minutes. I don't know why Arizona bothered coming out to play the third period in most of those games, and they were already getting blown out like 5-0. I mean, it was 5-0 twice.
Like, one of those was the elimination game, wasn't it?
Yeah, they got killed 7-1.
So I think, this series really, I don't really think it tells us a whole lot. I think it just tells us that Arizona needs to, I don't know, get a new coach maybe. We've talked at length about how on paper this roster is way better than it plays. So, like, maybe they need a new coach. I don't know if they need.
I don't know. I mean, they've tried so many different coaches, right? Like,
it's like, yeah, it's just like, what does this roster need? I mean, it needs an identity, first of all, but like...
Yeah. I mean, I don't know who they're going to get to be their GM, right? I'm not even going to speculate. I don't know what kind of prospects are available for them there. Whatever. But they need something. They need some kind of vision. And I don't think, like, John Chaika has very much the same vision that, like, Kyle Dubas did. They're both of similar ages. They're both in their mid-30s. They're both, like, analytics-driven. And I think we can see now that, like, the wholly analytic approach is not how to build a team in the NHL, because the two teams that were designed and built entirely on advanced stats have proven to underperform every single year. I mean, the Toronto Maple Leafs, with all the talent on that roster, should win Stanley Cup after Stanley Cup. But they can't defend, they can't do anything, and they didn't even make the playoffs this year. Arizona should be good, and they went out and got absolutely smashed by the Colorado. Like, it wasn't even like, oh, they played a decent series. They got smashed. Like, if they'd played a competitive 7-game series against the Avs, maybe, I think maybe Taylor Hall would be more inclined to stay, because he'd be like, okay, we went out there, we played a competitive 7-game series against...
arguably one of the best teams in the league.
But no, we went out there and got smashed in 5 games. And we only won 1 game on a fluke. It was a total lark that they managed to put that in the net.
And like I said, it's just the issue repeatedly is just that it's not even like, oh, the Coyotes are a young team and you can see the vision being built. Like, they got a lot of aging pieces like Derek Stepan, Goligoski,
Phil Kessel,
Ekman Larson. Darcy Kemper is not old, but he started to hit that point where he really should be starting to compete. Just a lot of pieces on his team that they're not young.
But they're not old.
But the core, in theory, should be good enough to compete. But it's not, and it never has. But what do you do? Because it's like, do you just shuffle one piece of paper out the waste bin and then put another one in? It's like, oh, we could trade Phil Kessel for Patrick Hornquist. It's like we're just moving deck chairs on the Titanic now. Like,
I mean, I really think their best, like, this sounds stupid, but because they tried to do it, but like building through the draft is probably their best opportunity to do anything here. And because of this being in the middle of the road, they haven't finished low enough to get the picks that they needed to compete, right? So now they're in a weird situation where they have some guys who are high draft choices like Jacob Chikrin or Clayton Keller, but they're being augmented by not other high-end talent, but guys who are pretty much all past their peak, or guys who are kind of dark horse candidates to become stars, right? Like Connor Garland had a good year, but he's kind of a dark horse. I wouldn't expect him to be an elite forward at all in the NHL, but he's a good second line guy. He's a good top six winger. They essentially have 2 second lines and 1 third and a good third line with Carl Soderberg, but it's just not enough to compete or catch any of these other teams in the division. Not even in the division, but like in the conference. Realistically, like they can't compete with those Central Division teams.
No.
And I think the difference between them and maybe the team like the Vancouver Canucks, who are young, who are like in a good spot, is that you can see the vision, you can see where that team is going to be in a couple of years, and it's going to be challenging those Central Division teams for a Stanley Cup. Like they're going to be good, barring any sort of catastrophes, right? But like in theory, the projection is that the Vancouver Canucks are going to be really good, and that doesn't bode well for the Arizona Coyotes, who should be in the same boat.
I think the real lack of a vision on the roster is what's ultimately killing them. Because you look at a lot of these teams that are playing deep, right? Like the Avs built a team around speed. They're a fast team. Mikko Rantanen, Nathan McKinnon, Cale Makar. Sure, Gabe Landeskog might not be the fastest, but then they went out and addressed some of their deficiencies by getting Nazem Kadri. Obviously, Gabriel Landeskog plays a heavy, power forward type game. But you can see the vision with which that roster was built. Vancouver is a similar ideal. They're built with speed, and they're built with speed and shot in mind. Brock Besser's got a great shot. Bo Horvat's got a great shot. Pettersson's got a great shot. Then they're all fast. Quinn Hughes is fast. Quinn Hughes can control basically the entire flow of the game from the back end. You can see the vision with which those rosters was built.
They're pretty big, too, is the thing. Like, they're pretty strong. It's just like I don't know what Arizona's going to do, and I don't know what there really is to do outside of tear it all down, right? Like, to find an identity, you're going to have to swallow some tough pills and trade some players you might not want to trade.
Well, they have like speedsters like Clayton Keller, Michael Grabner, and now Taylor Hall, but then you also have like slower, methodical possession type players like Derek Stepan and Ekman Larson, but then you also have like
big
guys like Nick Hjalmarsson, and it's like that's not to say a balanced team can't exist. Obviously, every team needs the yin to their yang, but it just seems like the Bruins, right? Pretty much all of their forwards outside of Pasternak really can play defense. They're a very tough team to play against. Their defense is all big and hard hitting. That's their identity. I look at the Coyotes, and it's just like every player seems to be not in it for himself, but like doing his own thing. What is Coyotes hockey?
There's no like synergy to the roster. It's just like, here are a bunch of players that we think should play well, and we're going to put them all on the ice together regardless of how well they play together. Whereas like the Capitals, right, the yin to their yang, right, you have Alex Ovechkin playing with Kuznetsov and Tom Wilson. 3 totally different players, but it works. There's a cohesion there, right? Whereas it's like they can all kind of skate. They're all, pretty big. They're pretty physical. It works. But then you get Derek Stepan playing with Clayton Keller and Taylor Hall, who he can't keep up with. And it's like, okay, so now it's a 2-on-3 most of the time. And Stepan either has to play a super aggressive game, and now he's caught all the time, or slows it down, and it just removes any element of the speed from those other 2 guys.
Yeah, it's just a total mess, and it's really unfortunate because I expected the Coyotes to take a big step this year. I think I put them second in the Pacific Division, and unfortunately, it looks like they're going to be taking a step back. But now we get into what I would consider like really the 2 most interesting series out of the Western Conference, which was Dallas, Calgary, and Vancouver, St. Louis. And I think you said, playing with the razor's edge, which like Dallas, when they were down in what was it? They were down 2-1, right, in a series, and then they were down in that game, and then they thought they tied it, but Corey Perry just had like a total brain dead moment and was standing on top of the goaltender.
They played with fire. They were definitely flirting with disaster.
If they lose that game and go down 3-1, they're probably out of the playoffs. But then you get an empty net goal to tie overtime winner, and bang, now it's 2-2.
And you're back in the series, and they really never looked back after that. I mean, they took that series they won the next 2 games to win the series. They won 3 in a row after no team had won more than 1 game in a row that whole series. So I mean, at the end of the day, didn't the Tkachuk injury hurt the Flames?
I think that's what did them in my opinion.
Oh, I mean, yeah. I think the other thing is the Stars just managed to find their game and actually just play. They came out they weren't playing great. They're playing nervous, right? Because they didn't look good in the round robin. They were trying to figure out what was wrong with what was wrong. But in games 5 and 6, you could tell that they were more comfortable.
And they started getting production out of guys they hadn't before. Like Jamie Benn started to put up a few points. Sagan didn't score his first goal until game 1 against Colorado, but he started to be a more noticeable player. Joe Pavelski managed to get on the scoreboard with a big hat trick in that game. You saw the pieces start to come together. They started to get production out of the guys that they needed to, and that continued into game 1 against Colorado. Denis Gurianov was largely invisible during that series against Calgary Flames.
He scores 4 goals. The first rookie in the second rookie in NHL playoff history, and the first player, I think, in all of Minnesota or Dallas's history to score 4 goals in a game. Because Joe Pavelski had only the second hat trick.
Yeah.
And none of them had come since they moved to Dallas. Which, by the way, blows my mind that guys like Mike Modano and Brett Hull never scored playoff hat tricks before, because those are 2 of the greatest players of all time
to ever touch the ice. Especially being noted goal scorers, not just great players.
And Joe Pavelski does it, but I mean, Joe Pavelski's a good hockey player. I'm not trying to take anything from him, but Denis Gurianov's a surprise. I thought he had a great regular season, but I think what it came down to was the Stars just took a long time to find their sea legs. And when they finally did, I mean, they looked like the team we thought they were going to be. They're scary, and they don't even have Ben Bishop still.
Yeah, and they're still playing Anton Khudobin, and they're getting great goaltending out of him. They put up, 6 goals in the second period of that elimination game. They were down 3-0. They went up 6-3.
Oh my God, that was honestly the wildest game I've ever seen in my entire life. Losing 3-0 to start the game. They come out and win and score an uncontested 7 straight goals to win the game.
Just unreal. And it's weird
that's
because
a big character move too. I mean,
and it's weird because we have been talking about that's not really what the Stars roster is all about. They're not really meant to score 6 goals in a period. They traded in guys, not actually traded, but they traded in from last year's roster guys like Jason Spezza and Matt Zuccarello for gritty, hardened veterans like Joe Pavelski and Corey Perry, clearly making a move towards a heavier, more physical style of hockey, as opposed to the depth scoring roles that they had with Matt Zuccarello and Jason Spezza. And the games they won, they were putting up 4 or 5 goals. And if the Stars offense can chip in 4 or 5 goals, you're going to have a really hard time putting 4 or 5 goals past that defense and Anton Khudobin. So it was just a really weird to see them winning games that way. And we'll talk about Dallas. We'll talk about the Colorado because there's a bit of an issue with the Colorado Avalanche now. But we'll get to Vancouver, St. Louis, which, I mean, the king is dead.
It was the most exciting series of the playoffs, in my opinion. I mean, not only did a young upstart team manage to come in and take down the Stanley Cup champion, they did it in a pretty commanding fashion. They looked like they were in control. I mean, there were moments, right, where the Blues made a push, right? They won 2 games. It was 6 games. Mm-hmm. But for the most part, the Canucks looked like they were in the driver's seat, and they never looked back. And in any inch that they were given by the St. Louis Blues, they took a mile. I mean, they dictated the terms most nights, and the Blues just couldn't match that level of energy or youth or speed or take your pick, right? I mean, the Canucks are just young and fast and strong and can score, and the Blues are a little older, a little slower, a little bigger. So the matchup wasn't really great in the Blues' favor, especially, but their biggest issue was they never managed to slow the games down. They played teams faster than them last year en route to a Stanley Cup, but they made it slow. They made it hard for them to skate. I mean, they did it to Dallas. They did it to, I don't know, who'd they even play? They did it to Dallas last year, I remember specifically.
Yeah, it's actually funny. I'm kind of drawing a blank who they played last year.
But anyway, the point is they managed, and the real test, during the regular season, they played a lot of good teams, and they managed to have success against them by slowing them down. the Canucks never bit. They couldn't slow the Canucks down. They couldn't. I mean, for all intents and purposes, they couldn't slow down Bo Horvat. Bo Horvat came out like a cannonball and just never stopped. He ran roughshod over that team for 6 games, and he might not have always been on the score sheet, but he was dangerous. He was always dangerous. He was more dangerous than Elias Pettersson.
Yeah. And I don't think this necessarily signals like a closing of a window for St. Louis or a drastic difference needed to be made. I just think it shows them that there's still some adjustments to be had with the differences in a roster. I mean, obviously you trade out Joel Edmondson for
Justin
Falk, that's not really like a huge change, but
I mean, it changes the way you play, right? It's a little less defensive emphasis, a little more puck moving. And to be fair, Justin Falk had great games for them in that first round. He played really well in games 4, 5, and 6.
Yeah, and they also lost some depth pieces. Like they lost Pat Maroon, who's big energy guy on the bench. Really, I don't think this changes much about my projection of the Blues being like perennial contenders. Asterisk, assuming they can sign Alex Pietrangelo this offseason.
The biggest question mark and the biggest like asterisk and issue I saw was Jordan Binnington. Can Jordan Binnington regain his form? Because for all intents and purposes, for most of the season, he was pretty inconsistent. He would there were stretches of him being in top Vezina form, and then he'd be bad, and then he'd be good again. And there's no time for that in the playoffs, and there's no time for that anywhere. You can't have a stretch of bad games and then turn it around. Like, you have to be good to go from the word jump, and he wasn't. And Jake Allen took his job, and Jake Allen actually looked much better than he did for, games 3, 4, 5, and 6? Or 3, 4, and 6?
And it's interesting because I was just actually looking. I thought Allen's contract was up this year, but he's actually on a 2-year deal, same as Jordan Binnington. So their contracts come up at the same time. So could we see potentially Jake Allen win his job back
from Jordan Binnington? I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if he's given the chance. Jake Allen was good for them last year. The team was terrible. It wasn't his fault they were in last place. He tried his best. But yeah, I don't know. It's just
obviously their focus right now is just let's get Petro under contract and let's figure that out. But
you can't let a guy like that walk. He's the captain.
You're
their number 1 defenseman.
But for Vancouver, and then we'll transition this into the second round series. I mean, they got slammed in game 1.
Oh, absolutely slammed. But I'm not that worried. Travis Green's a good coach. That's a good roster. I think they have a chance, obviously. But
I think on paper, really, these two teams match up pretty well. I mean, the goaltending, Markstrom and Leonard, is pretty similar. The defense for both teams is pretty good. I mean, take your pick between, Chris Tanev, Quinn Hughes. Tyler Myers, unfortunately, I think is hurt. I don't think he played game 1. But Chris Tanev, Quinn Hughes, Jordy Ben, and then on the other side you have like Alec Martinez, Shea Theodore. Pretty similar type defenses. And then the offense for both teams, I mean, you got guys like Mark Stone, Paul Stastny, Riley Smith, William Karlsson, and then on the other side you have Pettersson, Horvat, Best. Like, it's pretty similar on paper. I think really the only biggest difference is that Vegas has a lot more playoff experience. And maybe that was what showed us in round 1. Maybe Vancouver was a little bit jittery.
And I wouldn't expect the Canucks to be shell-shocked or anything at this point. I think they're just going to come out and play straight again. Like, they have no reason not to. They played the St. Louis Blues straight, and they won.
You're playing with house money. You have nothing to lose.
That's kind of it. I think that's what makes them especially dangerous right now, is that like teams like them, like teams like the Vancouver Canucks have zero expectation, and they're very dangerous because it was like Montreal, right? Montreal was dangerous to Philly because Montreal is like, we got here. We have no reason to be here. We might as well just see what happens, right? And Vancouver is kind of the same way. Vancouver isn't saying, oh, well, we have no reason to be here. Vancouver's saying, well, we got here, so nobody's expecting us to do anything, so we might as well do something, right? And here they are. Whereas, the other teams all have expectations like attached to them. Every team that made it to the second round all has some level of expectation attached to them.
Like, if Vegas loses in this series, or like if Vancouver goes out in this round, right? Say they get swept in round 2. They just get to come back next year and continue to build and grow as a team because most of their core is under 26.
Yeah.
If Vegas doesn't win the Stanley Cup this year, they have to deal with the brewing goaltender controversy, which is now exasperated, which was brewing beforehand and is now exasperated by Alan Walsh. And some of the pieces on this team aren't getting any younger. Not to say that they're old. Guys like Mark Stone, I think, is like 28, 29, 30. Like, he's getting up there. They're not 24, 23, 22 like the Vancouver Canucks.
Right.
The window for the Vegas Golden Knights is wide open right now, but it's at its apex, I think. You're only going to get less competitive as your core gets older. Yeah. Whereas Vancouver Canucks, they're basically just in the process of opening that window.
They're on their upswing.
So, like, they basically, if this core stays together, realistically, they have, like, another 7 to 8 years of competing together, which is a really, really scary thought. Whereas the Golden Knights may only have another 2 to 3.
The real interesting thing is, apparently the Canucks have been entertaining the idea of shopping Brock Besser, which I don't understand. Like, I don't think that really solves any of your issues, but that's kind of off topic. But, I mean, this core is good, and they're going to be the class of the Western Conference come a couple of years. I mean, they're going to be right back to where they were in 2010, 2011, right? Competing for Stanley Cups and winning President's Trophies probably, and just being absolutely dominant. But for right now, they're young, they're inexperienced, and if they win 1 or 2 playoff rounds, they're just looking at like, hey, we did it.
And you got house money, bro. It's basically like you walked into the casino and they handed you $1,000.
Yeah, if you lose it all, who cares? It's not your money.
A team that does have something to lose and did lose a big chunk of what they had to lose in Game 1 was the Colorado Avalanche. Philip Grubauer goes down. Really awkwardly, he stretched out to make a save, immediately reached for his groin, did not get up, had to be helped off the ice and put no weight on his, I think it was his right leg. Speaking from experience, it looks very, very similar to what happened to Yaroslav Halak in 2016 when he went down right before the playoffs for the Islanders, and that's why Thomas Greiss had to step in, stretched out to make a save, immediately reached for his groin, and Halak was out for 3 months. If Grubauer's out long-term, what does this mean for the Colorado Avalanche? Do you think they can still compete with Pavel Francouz in the net?
It's going to be tougher. I mean, it's definitely going to be tougher because Francouz isn't. I mean, Grubauer is not proven by any stretch, right? I mean, he's been. I think the real. Johnson went down with an injury too, right?
And Eric Johnson's also hurt. I think Matt Calvert is also hurt.
Yeah, so I think the big thing is that, like, it's not that they lost anything particularly huge, right? Because I don't think there's a huge difference between Grubauer and Francouz in terms of, like, talent. They're both pretty good. I think it's, like, the fact they lost 3 or 4 pieces all at once, which pretty much guts the roster, right? Now your backup has to go in. You have to find another guy to play on defense. Matt Calvert comes out. You have to try to fill that hole in the fourth line. And against a team that is realistically significantly deeper than they are in Dallas. I mean, with their starting lineups, they're not. They're pretty equal. But at this point, like, dealing with injuries where Dallas is pretty much all healthy except for the fact that Ben Bishop isn't playing, which doesn't really bother you if you have Anton Khudobin,
right,
who's winning games almost, the way he is. So, I don't know. I mean, I'm not going to count Colorado out. There's no reason to count out Nathan MacKinnon. But I don't know if they're going to win a Stanley Cup without Philip Grubauer, and that didn't look good. That looked like it could be long-term. I mean, even if it's just like he might have ruptured his groin, he might have pulled this, that. I mean, who knows what he did with how he stretched, right?
Well, they're definitely, it was put out today that they're definitely missing the entire second round. There's no possibility of Eric Johnson or Grubauer back before the second round is over.
Right.
I think it's just really, obviously it's never a good time to lose your starting goaltender, but I think the ultimate worry for the Avalanche is not only did they lose Grubauer and Eric Johnson, but they lost him in a game where Tyler Seguin got on the board. Denis Gurianov looked really good. Radulov picked up 2 goals. The Stars' big boys are coming out to play, and they're starting to show what they didn't show against the Calgary Flames, which is why they're there. So not only do you lose your starting goaltender, but then you lose your starting goaltender to a team who's essentially the sleeping giants are waking up. And I don't think that bodes very well for the Avalanche. And it's kind of like what we've been saying. This Avalanche team is really good, but without that goaltender, we don't know if they can compete with the rest of these other teams like Dallas, Boston, Tampa, and now they don't even have Philip Grubauer. So interesting situation there for Dallas and Colorado. And then we'll get to the last series here that actually played a game. We're recording this during the Islanders game. Boston, Tampa Bay. Boston takes a 1-0 lead. Very strong game for Yaroslav Halak. Good game for Andrei Vasilevsky too. I think this series is going to go 7. I mean, these teams are like pretty fairly evenly matched.
I think, honestly, I'm pretty sure we could wrap up these last 2 series, like the Eastern Conference series, by saying like these 2 matchups are probably the toughest in the playoffs left. I mean, it's 2 teams that are almost mirror images of one another, except for the Bruins is more defensive emphasis than the Tampa Bay Lightning, which is a little more like, scoring emphasis. But otherwise, the Islanders and the Flyers, that's like those 2 teams are staring at each other like that Spider-Man meme, like pointing at each other. Because it's like they rely on their goaltenders and they rely on their defense. And Philly's forwards might be a little more dangerous than the Islanders, but the Islanders' defense is so much more like
structured,
and shut down than Philly's. I mean, I think honestly, the Eastern Conference might be kind of wide open at this point. Any 4 of these teams could get through and win a Stanley Cup. They're all good. And I remember saying like that the Central Division teams are really going to be the odds-on favorites to win, but I don't know if I'm betting against any of these Eastern Conference teams right now. Even the Islanders, as much as I may hate to admit it as a Ranger fan, like I wouldn't bet against them because of what they just did to the Washington Capitals. They made them look like a fucking chump team. Like it was not.
Yeah, like I said earlier, I would put Boston and Tampa kind of in that upper echelon, and the Islanders and the Flyers maybe a step below, but I mean, honestly, I feel pretty good about any of these 4 teams potentially, like you said, going all the way. In the West, I mean, I really think, in my opinion, whoever comes out of Dallas, Colorado is going to go to the Stanley Cup final. And that's not a knock on Vegas. That's not a knock on Vancouver. But I just think that those 2 teams are complete. They're whole. I mean, really outside of the hole in net now for Colorado with the unfortunate injury. They're complete rosters. They're whole rosters. These are teams that should be competing for a Stanley Cup. Whereas Vegas is, to me, I still don't know really what their identity is. And I think that's going to end up hurting them in the long run. But yeah, I think it's really kind of wide open at this point, and it's going to be real interesting. If I had to pick, my bracket's still pretty much intact. The only team that lost was St. Louis, but I had them in the Western Conference Finals, so like, ouch.
St. Louis nuked my bracket too.
I would say, I would pick Vegas, I would pick Dallas, I would pick Boston, or I would pick Tampa, and I picked Philly actually in my bracket in this matchup with the Islanders. So, anything last minute you kind of wanted to add on about the first round or the second round?
I'm trying to think. I don't think so. There hasn't been any big injuries. There hasn't been any big news outside. We talked about Todd Reardon
and Alan Walsh.
An
absolute lunatic.
Mike Milbury. Mike Milbury has voluntarily. We know it's not voluntary. We know NBC gave him the can, but
that man would never can finish.
So he has been. I'm just going to put it the way it actually happened, right? So NBC Sports has asked Mike Milbury to voluntarily step down from any further broadcaster in the NHL playoffs because he made what is essentially one of the most boneheaded and insensitive comments about specifically women that he could have made. He's like, the guys in the bubble, these are his words, not mine. Please don't cancel me. In the bubble, he said, these guys are easy. There are no women here, so there's no distractions, implying that women are only distractions to professional athletes and not, wives and mothers and, or companions.
Specifically to him, co-workers, a.k.a. AJ Malesko.
I just don't understand. I really just don't understand why he I'm glad he's gone, right? I hated Mike Milbury. For a guy who's been around the sport of hockey as long as he has, 22 years as a player in Boston, and then 3 years as their coach, 2 years as the coach of the Islanders, and then 7 years as GM of the Islanders. And this man sounds like he's never stepped foot on a rink. Some of the things he says are so dumb and boneheaded, and honestly, I think we're better off without him. I'm glad he's out of the bubble. I'm glad he's gone. I don't particularly care for him. I never have, and I'm not really going to hide it. I think NBC's broadcast crew has done a great job up to this point. I like a lot of what they brought in. AJ Malesko's been good. She just has to learn. She's new to this, so for her, the rhythm of the actual game is a little new, which is fine. She'll get better with time. She doesn't say anything stupid. She doesn't say anything bad. It's always honestly on the money and pretty useful information, about guys and situations and players, because I'm pretty sure she played hockey, right?
I believe she played professional women's hockey.
Right.
I think she at least played college.
Right. So I know she's at least a hockey player. So she's been around the sport. She knows, not to say you have to be on the sport to be involved in it, right? But like she's been around the sport. She knows that she's knowledgeable of the sport. She knows what she's talking about. And then the regular slate of NBC broadcasters is just good. Edzo, Doc. We're not going to talk about Pierre. I don't know how Pierre got in the bubble. But, Pierre's not great, but he's there. He's okay. Marv Albert's been good. It's just always been Mike Milbury's always been the black spot on their record. And they finally got rid of him. And I think, honestly, NBC's better for it.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, here's the thing, right? There's been a lot of talk this postseason about the commentators and the play-by-play and the color commentators, and I would honestly say that the play-by-play announcers are all solid, and they always have been. The color commentary was off and on. Obviously, like you said, I just want to reiterate to everyone out there that we both really like AJ Malesko. She's incredibly insightful. She knows the sport. She knows what she's talking about. And when she opens her mouth, generally speaking, what comes out of it is something useful. It adds to the broadcast. Whereas when Mike Milbury opens his mouth, it just detracts from whatever's going on more often than not. Like you said, Malesko's new, so she needs to learn the pace of the broadcast. I mean, I know that she and Kenny Albert have kind of like interrupted each other a lot, but again, that just comes with time. That just comes with experience. I mean, like when we first started doing this, we interrupted each other all the time.
I think the other thing is like finding that like space in a hockey broadcast is a lot harder than we are. I mean, Rob and I are sitting face to face, looking at each other, talking, so it's like a normal conversation. A hockey game, she's down in the glass. Kenny Albert or whoever is up in the booth. They don't see each other. It's hard to tell when somebody's getting ready to talk. And a lot of these guys are professional broadcasters. They went to school for this. Like, this is their job. She was a hockey player who just so happened to become a broadcaster, so it's a little different. It's just a pace of the game thing. She'll figure it out, and I'm confident she'll be one of the best analysts that NBC has right now. She's one of the most, like you said, one of the most insightful. And it's just like, why did they employ Mike Milbury for so long?
Yeah, that's kind of what I was going to end up wrapping my statement up with, was that Mike Milbury, when he talks, I mean, it's either he's just repeating to you what's on the screen and what your eyes can see, or he's just making some like boneheaded comment about like, that's not how it was played in my day, or like old boys club. And I think that we really need to get away from that, because hockey is not an old boys club anymore. I mean, more teams are employing more women. I mean, the Islanders have both, AJ Malesko was a big part of their broadcasts. Shannon Hogan is a big part of the Islanders broadcast. A lot of teams are employing women, and there's just no room for it in the game anymore. No. I mean, look, there's no room for it in society, right? At this point, if you're sexist, racist, bigoted, I cannot begin to fathom why you're that way, or how you can justify that to yourself.
Rationalize it, yeah.
But because there's just no room for it anymore. This is not the old boys club anymore. This is 2020.
And I think for all intents and purposes, the NHL and all like networks and people affiliated with the NHL going forward have been remarkably progressive. In the air, I mean, hockey is a sport steeped in tradition, right? Everything we do is tradition. They did it this way 100 years ago, so we still play in the NHL this way. But that being said, the NHL has been, honestly, probably outside of like maybe the NBA, has been probably the most progressive in moving forward with their, race relations, their You Can Play initiatives, fostering, relationships with LGBTQ plus communities, minority communities, underprivileged communities, The idea with the NHL is that they're trying to foster now is like, you can play, everybody can be a part of the sport. This is an inclusive space, and there's just no place for guys like Mike Milbury with opinions stuck in the Stone Age like that. And the NHL, and in this case NBC, moved incredibly fast to remove him from broadcasts and keep him off future broadcasts for now. Who knows if they're going to rehire him? I mean, we saw it happen with Jeremy Roenick.
Yeah.
Jeremy Roenick, for all intents and purposes, made an off-color joke that might not have been all that terrible. I mean, it wasn't good. I'm not going to defend it. It was in poor taste. It was off-color. He should have never said it. He should have known better than to say it about somebody he works with. And they fired him.
As they should have, right.
So it's like anybody affiliated with the NHL or the NHL itself has done a great job of this.
And I mean, we've even seen that just how quickly the NHLPA and the commissioner with, I forget the official name of it, the group that Matt Dumba, Evander Kane,
Oh, I know you're talking about. JT Brown's involved, right?
I forget the official name of it, but for all, we'll just call it here the hockey. I think it's the equality something or hockey in.
It usually comes up on the bottom of broadcasts, like on like the broadcast bar. It has like the little name of it.
Yeah,
like,
I forget. So my apologies to Matt Dumba and his team for forgetting specifically what their name is. But they've done a fantastic job with, before every game all the teams would stand in alignment, and they've made the statement about the NHL. And we skate for equality. They gave Matt Dumba not only the mic for the players in the stands or for the players on the bench, but they gave him the airtime and the network time for him to make his statement before the game with the Minnesota Wild. And he gave his, I think it was like a minute and a half, 2-minute speech.
Ryan Reeves was given the opportunity with, I think it was, who was it on the other team? They stood at, they kneeled at center ice.
Was it Sagan?
Maybe it was somebody.
I know Leonard did it with him.
I know you know what I'm talking about though, right? At the
Yeah.
beginning of that series. And again, this isn't us being like ignorant or whatever. It's just there's so much hockey
Yeah,
that like this
it's
stuff
just,
just
like-
got like buried and lost. I'm sorry. Like
We literally watched like 5 or 6 games a day for like 2 weeks straight. But
Yeah,
ultimately,
so-
the point is that they've done very well to, not hush this up like we've seen other professional sports do, like with the NFL. I mean, with everything that happened with Colin Kaepernick, who was basically blackmailed and blackballed from the sport. We've seen it in other sports where it's been kind of like pushed aside, pushed under the rug. Like,
I mean, the
we'll do
MLB
something. Like, we'll do something in February, but like, man, not really. Like, the NHL's really taking this to heart. Like, We Skate for Equality is still on the boards at, I think, all the games.
it's on the scoreboard at every game.
And this is an initiative that started like less than a month ago. So I'm really excited to see where they take this next season, when they'll have an entire hockey season to dedicate this to. And there's just no room for people that are going to make comments like that. It's funny because everyone talks about like, Pierre and like how weird he is. For all the things that Pierre Maguire does that's weird, like knowing where these guys played like junior midget hockey when they were like 13, at the very least you can say he's never been a bigot. And,
Pierre Maguire,
like,
honestly, is for all intents and purposes the biggest fan of hockey I've ever seen.
yeah,
The guy isn't the things he says isn't always insightful, and he might sound stupid and say some really creepy, weird things, but he loves this game. You can tell he watches tons and tons of hockey, and you can tell he really respects the people he works with. He doesn't go out of his way to make off-color comments, which is, I guess, where we're trying to get at with Mike Milbury and Jeremy Roenick, which is that they clearly didn't respect their coworkers or women at large enough to not say something so stupid on national television.
Yeah, there's no excuse anymore. It's 2020. You got to know better.
That's it. There's no room for it anywhere. And this is just honestly the logical conclusion of where the NHL was at the beginning of the season, which is the idea, like with the coach in Calgary and when all that came out, the NHL moved incredibly fast. Swift, he was fired, gone, fined. The league essentially blacklisted him, which is good. I would have blacklisted him too. I mean, for all the people that argue that cancel culture, this isn't a political argument, but the people that argue that cancel culture is stupid, I mean, there are people that inherently deserve to be canceled, and these are the types of people that deserve to be canceled. Bigots, misogynists, people who don't like... there's no place for it in society. There's no place for it in our sport.
Yeah.
And the NHL is a private enterprise, so they can choose to employ and fire whoever they want. And if you don't agree with the standards that they've set out for their league or their players or their staff or the people affiliated with them, you get the boot. That's it. There's no complaining.
Yeah, and I know some people will say like, oh, you should never root for somebody to lose their job or anything like that, but like, he kind of deserved it. And Mike Milbury,
The only person I want to see lose their job more than Mike Milbury, I'm sorry, is Jack Edwards at NESN. And that's just because he's an awful hometowner. But like outside of that, like Milbury got what was coming to him. This isn't the first time he said stupid stuff. It's just that the world isn't as intolerant as it used to be, which sounds awkward because saying we're not tolerating this, but the idea is that like we're intolerant towards intolerance. So
yeah. I think
that's like the last big thing, right?
I think that's more or less. The only other thing is just quickly with St. Louis. I think it was Tarasenko. I think he left the bubble, so I think he's gone for the rest of the playoffs. I don't think he's coming back.
Oh, he went for He went back to St. Louis to see a specialist.
Yeah,
Was
so
it his shoulder, I think?
I think so. So I think they said he's done. I think he's not playing.
He left the bubble, what was it, last week to go get that MRI, and then he came back into the bubble, was quarantined, and then left the bubble. I mean, he could come back. But, like, all signs point to that not happening, considering the injury was bad enough they have to send him home back to St. Louis.
So we just wanted to, wish him well. Hope that everything goes well for him.
I mean, hopefully it's not bad enough. Hopefully we see him back maybe in the Western. Well, I mean, he's gone. St. Louis is out, so like he's home. But
to all the players that are ultimately sent home, we hope that they all obviously
stay safe.
We hope they're with their family. For the players that are still playing, the NHL again put out another test tweet today. 0 positives through 2 rounds, which is fantastic.
Incredible.
So everything's going well. Still lots of hockey to be played. We'll probably meet back up with you guys again next week. We'll see. Maybe we'll do another episode by the time we're done doing it next week. The rounds will probably be like halfway done. So yeah, unless something big comes up, in which case we'd probably end up doing like a mini pod or something. We will see you guys with the next week whenever we do like our midpoint, maybe a wrap up. I don't know how fast they're planning on getting these games done. So we'll see. So I want to thank you guys for watching, and we will see you guys again next time.